Welcome to the 5AM podcast, where we bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders and influencers who are making headway and some waves in their industries and callings. Today, we are thrilled to have Blake Fischer, an insightful host, creator of the Homeless Conservative podcast and YouTube channel. Blake is on a mission to elevate political discourse beyond the partisan rhetoric, mudslinging. You could probably put that on the list too, focusing on conservative policies, current politics, and the historical context that shapes today's events. With a commitment to fact-based discussion and a passion for fostering a well-informed citizenry, Blake offers a refreshing perspective on America's political landscape. Get ready for a thought-provoking conversation that will challenge conventional thinking and promote a more maybe nuanced understanding of conservative ideas, and we appreciate you being here and joining in on this conversation. If you haven't already, please help us grow 5AM podcast with a like, share, and a subscribe here or there. The other thing that would be great is if you give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. That would be nice. And if you want to amp up your support just a little bit more, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com/5AMpodcast, buy a few cups of coffee. And I would be remiss if I did not thank those who were pitching in for cups of coffee over the weekend and last week. Thank you very much. Blake Fischer, welcome to the 5AM podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. We'll start out with your podcast. It's the main reason why you and I connected, and I wanted to have you on. And your aim seems honorable. It's a move beyond that mudslinging and partisan rhetoric that we're just so inundated with. And what inspired you to take this maybe a higher road approach to today's polarized political climate?
The shortest version of it, I mean, I've always been into politics. I always kind of wanted to do a political podcast, could never quite figure out what to do though. And I finally was just like, I got to do it. So I've got to figure out what to do. I knew I was frustrated by unfortunately, I feel like social media specifically really ramped up. The news has always been about what's bad and what scares people and some sort of element of outrage. But the social media algorithms just really ramped it up to a level that it's the easier way to get eyeballs, right?
Yes.
But unfortunately, I think it makes people more fearful than they need to be. I think it also makes people less trusting of anyone that disagrees with them. And it's also sorted us into everything is you're on this side or that side, and there's no nuance. And we do it with every single issue, even ones that are, I don't think, really black and white issues at all. Yeah. And we turn them into, well, that person's for it, and I'm normally against that person, so I must be against that thing. And that's essentially the most thought that most people are putting into it. And most of the people in the media that are doing this are either captured by their audience, and so they're worried that if they stray from that, they'll lose their audience and their money, therefore. And so I just kind of said, okay, look, I'm not making any money this when I start it, and so I'm going to do it the hard way. And it is the hard way. I can say that it's not as rewarding as it would be, but I can sleep at night. And I hope that I really do think that most people in the country are like me, and they are tired of the outrage, and they're tired of the fear mongering and the loud, and they think they're in the minority because they're not loud. And really, those loud people are the fringiest of the right and the left.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I just wanted to make a show for the other people. And when I say the middle, I don't mean politically. I don't mean centrist or center right or center left. I just mean not insane is what I mean.
I gotcha. It's kind of like, I think it was Shrek. There was probably somebody else who said this, but can't we settle this over a pint?
Yeah. And I've found that for the most part, that's always how my life has been. I was a musician in my 20s, so most of the people I was hanging out with were very liberal, and I'm very conservative. And I've never had a fight in real life with someone over politics. I've had debates and disagreements, but not yelling or calling each other names. Like, that never happens in real life with me. And I'm sure it does for maybe it does. I don't know. I don't see that happening. But online, it's just really easy to get behind a keyboard or on your phone and say things that you would never say to someone's face. And I think that's just been really bad for political discourse in America. And I think that there are a lot of problems that they're 80-20 issues. 80% of the country agrees this is a problem and even agrees on the solution a lot of times. And yet we're not getting there because people feel like they have to sort onto these two sides, and compromise is a bad word. And so nothing gets done. And so I'm trying to do something a little different and talk about those solutions and talk about the things that I think we hear politicians say common sense solutions all the time. And they're not really even talking about common sense solutions. They just love to slap that label on stuff and pretend that it is. But there are quite a few things that are 80-20, 70-30 kind of things in the country. And even those things are not getting done because Congress is not willing to piss off the 30% of people that would be pissed off about it. It's kind of strange.
That's right. Yeah, it's the bullies are always a small percentage of the crowd. And you've described political media as a team sport. How do you think this mentally affects public discourse and policymaking?
Well, I think that there's a couple things that it kind of influences. One is that because we're so 50-50 split in the country right now, most people in Congress, there's only like 40-ish seats that are even not safe at this point, safely red or safely blue. Those people are generally the ones that are actually more nuanced and stuff, because it's the Republicans in New York that are like, hey, I'm in a pretty blue state and I'm a Republican. I can't just go toe the Trump line kind of thing, or else I'm going to not get reelected. Yes. If you basically, anyone that's not in those safe seats is actually just worried about getting primaried. And so that means they're worried about someone further to their right or further to their left if they're a Democrat. And I think the media and when I say the media, I'm not like, yes, I'm talking about CNN and MSNBC, but really I'm talking about YouTube and podcasters and the new social media stuff where there is no editor. Honestly, most of them lie all the time. All the time. And I think that's the most frustrating thing for me, is that I see someone that like lies constantly and they have millions of followers. And it bothers me because I don't think those people know they're being lied to. Yeah. But what generally it turns into is those people sort of eating their own. So this is AOC beating the number 3 Democrat in Congress, and so you sacrifice a leadership position at that point. You have this young person, and even someone like AOC is kind of started to grow up a little bit. I still disagree with her on almost everything, but you can tell she's being a little less performative. Yeah. She was not one of those people, making a big scene at the speech this week in front of Trump, because I think she understands, to her credit, that she was getting nothing done doing the performative stuff in Congress. And so I do believe that she actually wants to get stuff done. I disagree with what she wants to do, but that's a great example of most people don't take that path. Most people continue to just lob bombs and are willing to be, the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Tlaibs and those sort of people that are really not serious about their job. And they're using these things as platforms to be famous. That's essentially what everyone in Congress just wants to be on TV. Clicks. And it's strange. They don't want to do the actual job of legislating. And I think the media contributes to that by anytime they do anything that looks like compromise, or anything that looks like working with the other side, or even just, they're to pass anything. That's how Congress is supposed to work. That's literally how the Constitution was set up. It's supposed to be slow. It's supposed to be hard. They didn't
methodical.
It's supposed to be methodical. But they get vilified for that and then potentially primaried. And so I just think it's a really bad cycle between Congress and media. And also the online thing is really weird. I think most people are paying way too much attention to Twitter and think that that's the real world. Although in some ways it sort of has become the real world because of the Donald Trump administration and Elon Musk being up there and owning Twitter. There's a weird thing where it's kind of becoming real life, but it's not really representative of the whole country.
Yeah, it's kind of like form follows function. Designing a teapot, obviously there's only one spot after you figure out what this teapot's supposed to do that the handle can go. And this political industry, entertainment complex, whatever, industrial complex, if we could get rid of polls and not see polls, I'm pretty sure neighbors would get along much better, or people online would get much better at being nice to each other. Also, too, if people were doxxed on a regular basis, that would probably clean up their attitude. But let's talk about classical liberalism and the Republic and those core principles. How can we apply, if we could not necessarily turn back the clock, but reach into the past and say, hey, here's some really good ideas from classical liberalism that we need to apply to today?
What's interesting, I've found that when I have conversations with people that would not especially like liberal people that might not think they're conservative at all. And then all of a sudden, Donald Trump's the president, and they're talking about, Hochul in New York, the governor, is talking about federalism all of a sudden because Donald Trump's trying to say she can't have her tax on coming into the city or whatever, or that toll. Well, it's interesting to me that once they're not in power, they're all of a sudden about federalism. They're all of a sudden about liberties and stuff. And so to me, I don't know how to solve that problem. It seems like people are more for that when they're not in power. And then once they get in power, they're like, no, we want to control everything. That's specifically talking about, politicians. But as far as people go, I think most people just don't understand. I mean, look, the polls, this is more of not the poll you're kind of talking about, but it's more of a survey. It's like 50% of the country can't name the three branches of the government. I think we're doing a terrible job at civics education in this country. And it's showing because most people just don't understand how the government's supposed to work. And when you explain it to them, they generally go, yeah, that would be better. When we say if Congress did actually exercise the power that the founders gave them, we would be better. I think almost every problem we have right now, all the big problems would be solved if we actually followed that structure and we actually worked that way. And I realize like politics is always going to be messy. It always has been. It's always going to be, there's always going to be things, but sort of classical liberalism thing is the idea that, who was it? Was it Madison that said it, or that that was basically if men were angels, you wouldn't need government, right? But they're not. And so the government has to be set up in a way that we expect someone that has no character and someone that's going to try to take advantage of it is going to be in there, and they have to have a check against that. And I think the other thing, like kind of going back to the media thing, I think we've nationalized everything, which, I'm part of this too, because I'm mostly talking about national politics stuff and not local stuff. But local stuff is really important. And it's not that I'm not, my show is not about it, but I'm very much like into local politics and stuff too. And I think most people are just voting for president every 4 years and expecting that one person to be able to fix all their problems. And then they don't. And we've been in this cycle of, never mind, you didn't do what I asked you to. Let's try the next person. For 4 election cycles now, 26, basically we flipped Democrat, Republican since 2012. And we've basically done the same thing with Congress. And so I think it's clear that people are not happy with the way government's working. I just don't think anyone's really talking to them about like the better way it could work. Yes. I feel like we had a glimpse of that with the Tea Party stuff in 2010, except that
that got co-opted and then
it got co-opted and it turned into a grift, and it was, but I do think there was a genuine, I think most people were genuinely going like, we want something else here. Like, this is not working, especially after the 2008 financial crisis. Right. And so that was like a glimmer of it. I think it being leaderless was a bad idea. Actually, I get that, like, that sounds nice, but you really do need a good leader. And the truth is we just don't have good leaders now.
I don't think so. Yeah, I would agree with that. There's an old book. I had my staff read it years ago called The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon. It is, you can find it on Amazon. It's like $8 or $9. And when you read that, even though it was written during the time of the French Revolution, or after the French Revolution, I should say, you read it and think, wow, that actually is appropriate for last year or 4 years ago. And when you have strong crowds, that means you have weak leaders. When you have strong leaders, you have weak crowds, because the crowds can actually trust their leader. And when you have people like we see today, even the Democrats sitting there with their little panels with words on them. And unfortunately for Al Green, okay, showman, sure, thanks for coming out and making a spectacle. But like, we don't really want people in the halls of Congress, or in the seats, I should say, to be throwing like popcorn and tomatoes at the guy speaking. But it's decorum would be nice if it returned. And one thing, and I'm heading somewhere with this, asking you a question about labels, because that was the tactic that's been used. Like, Tea Party got nailed with labels, and, right and left wing, ladies and gentlemen, it's on the same bird. It's really on the same bird. They just try to shovel us off. Can you maybe talk about that? It seems so intentional that they try and pit Americans against each other.
Yeah, I think the weird thing now with the left and right labels is they really make zero sense now, because the right the Republican Party under Donald Trump is not, there's nothing conservative about it at all. They don't want to reduce the size of government. They just want to be the ones in charge of government. They don't think that they're not, they're pretending that's what they're doing, but the truth is they're not. They just want their people in there instead. And so it's weird that we have these left-right kind of things. I mean, maybe there are some, I think really it's just the social stuff where there's any difference now.
I think so.
And, on the margins, it's like Republicans want to send us into debt by cutting taxes, and Democrats want to do it by not cutting taxes, but spending more money. And I mean, Republicans are spending a lot of money too. So it's interesting that there's this left-right thing. And like I said, we have to sort everything into those categories. Although you could go back 10 years and most of those positions were totally different 10 years ago. Like Republicans were the anti-tariff. We were the free trade people, and all Democrats weren't. And that is switched now. It's not actually totally switched, just everyone's pro-tariff, although they're against tariffs when it's Donald Trump saying it. But then if Biden continues those tariffs, they don't have a problem with it anymore.
That's right.
So it's hypocrisy is a huge problem. And most people, if you ask them to list out the things that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party cared about, or the right and the left cared about, I think they would list all the bullet point things that are really not issues. Like we're talking way more. Like the transgender stuff, for example, is fine to have an opinion on that, but it is such a small issue compared to all of the other issues, and yet it dominates most of what we talk about. And that doesn't make any sense to me. We're basically fighting about these things that, like, abortion used to be this thing because it was easy for politicians to toss that political football back and forth because there was this thing, no matter what law they passed or whatever, it didn't work because it was until Dobbs happened. It was like a thing that they couldn't do anything about, but they could talk about doing all the time. And I think Republicans have really, I think abandoned the pro-life movement. I don't see any. Donald Trump is not pro-life. He's a pro-choice candidate. You cannot say he's not. And, the pro-life movement should feel used because they were. And to me, that's just a perfect example of like, once they can do something about it, they kind of stop talking about it. Totally. Republicans had no idea, even though they got a leaked memo on Dobbs like 3 months in advance, they still didn't have a plan when it happened, which is crazy to me, right? You had a heads up that this was going to happen. This was 50 years of work, and you blew it on the execution of that. We should have been ready to say, here's what we think, and here's what we would encourage states to do. Here's the kind of thing. Like Republicans should have had a strategy there. And you talk about the Democrats, same thing. There is no strategy right now. They lost in November and they have no idea what to do. And it's clear because some people are like wearing pink, some people are holding up signs, some people are making disturbances, some people aren't. They clearly have no idea what to do. Their constituents are telling them to fight. And so they have to do something performative like that that is on TV. They're not actually doing anything in the background that would actually help that. And so I don't know. I think every problem we have boils down to Congress not doing their job. Like almost everything that anyone ever brings up, I go, well, yeah, Congress could do that if they just did their job. Now, unfortunately, I could blame Congress all we want because Congress has a really low approval rating. I think some polls say it's polls lower than syphilis or something. It's kind of crazy, but we're really the problem there because we're the people that elect these Congress people. And in all those kind of polls that come out, we hate Congress, but we always rate our congressperson or our senator higher than we rate Congress as a whole. And like I said, it all comes back to voters. It's about civic education. And so that's what I'm certainly trying to do on my show a lot of is, okay, we've been here before. This is not the first time this has happened. We just have a really bad understanding of, and I'm not like it's not like I've got a PhD in it or something like that. I enjoy stuff, and it's not that hard with the internet now to look up, has this happened before? Is there a precedent for this? Have we solved this problem before? Have we tried this before and it failed? Because that's the other thing is that all these politicians, and especially the ones that are trying to come at someone from the left or the right and take them over in a primary, generally they have these grand ideas that they think are new, and they're not new. Like, I can't remember who's the new guy that's going around and real popular right now that's talking about like we should have a monarchy as if that's a new idea.
Yes,
I'm like, yeah, we ditched this 250 years ago for a reason. Monarchy is not a new idea. It was literally the only idea for all of human history until 250 years ago. And so, this is not a new idea. And yet people are going, wow, this is what a new idea. It's not a new idea. It's just changing some of the language. And I wish I could remember his name, but I just go, what are we doing?
I heard that comment as well, and I did not even pay any attention to it. Fortunately, it just kind of flew over my head. I was going to talk to you about, it seems like everybody has an ideology of convenience. get, like, what's going to get me? The social media influencers want the clicks, and the political influencers are just like, what ideology do I need? Which way is the wind blowing?
Yeah.
Point me in that direction.
There go the people, and I got to follow them because I'm their leader, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
what was that quote? Yeah, I don't know. Again, that's our fault as voters for not demanding better leaders. I think it's, you go back to 2016 and you could say that field was crowded, and people like Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio and Kasich were splitting votes of the sort of normal Reaganite Republican kind of stuff.
So.
And that's how Donald Trump wins, and with a plurality. But look, in 2024, we don't have that excuse. The Republicans chose Donald Trump over Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Chris Christie, Doug Burnham, a bunch of governors that have pretty good track records in their state. I'm not saying I agree with everything they say or anything, but I think all of them would be clearly better executives, just based on have they done the job of this before, and how did they do if we rated them? And if you put all their accomplishments on paper and didn't have, it was like a blind test, most people that think they're conservative would not pick Donald Trump. And yet,
correct,
they just felt like, there's all sorts of reasons that happened. But to me, you go, look, Republicans have no one to blame but themselves if this goes poorly, because they had other options. It's not the binary choice between Trump and Kamala Harris or Trump and Hillary Clinton is one thing. I can understand why people go, I'm picking the lesser of these. Are both really unpopular people. I don't think either one would be good at the job. I'm going to pick one of them. And I think people wanted to pick disruption in 2016 specifically is why they picked Donald Trump. And I think that Biden and Harris did such a terrible job for 4 years that the country was just going to reject the Democrats. It didn't matter who was up there. But in the primary, we don't have that excuse. Republicans had a wide field of capable people. Everyone on that Republican primary, other than, in my opinion, Vivek Ramaswamy, was a serious candidate. I think there was no one up there that was, not a governor or pretty serious senator like Tim Scott. And, it's a bummer that then those people don't continue. Other than Chris Christie, that entire stage has gone full bootlicking with Donald Trump and will never. And I just don't think that's what politics should be about. I think that we should be fighting within our party as far as we should be going, no, we think this idea is better. No, we think that's a bad idea. We think that's bad behavior. We think that's good. We're not holding each other accountable within the parties. And so it makes it seem super hypocritical when we try to hold the other party accountable. It doesn't, no one buys it.
That's right. And so looking ahead from my time of volunteering and working behind the scenes in some political things, I realized that the time to start working on your next election is the day after the election, and give yourself 4 years to build up who you are as a leader. What do you see as both parties in the next election? Do you think there's anyone now who could actually build a reputation of being a leader to get into that election 4 years from now?
Well,
That's a tough question in my mind.
Historically, anyone we talk about even 2 years out from an election as, they're definitely the shoe-in is dead in the water before the primary bit happens a lot of times. In 2012, I think it was Scott Walker we were talking about. In 2016, we were talking about Jeb Bush. In 2020, I don't really think most people were talking about Joe Biden going into that. It was all Bernie Sanders because of 2016. So we're kind of, I feel like we're always wrong about what's going to happen even 2 years out. So I don't know that it's worth saying who the person is. I am pretty confident in saying I do not think a leader is going to come along in either party and really change things in 2028. I think that could happen in 2032. But just based on the Republicans are in a weird spot in that obviously J.D. Vance is going to want to be that person. There's going to be a weird thing in the Republican Party of like, will anyone push back on that, or will they just kind of crown him? I don't know. So I think we'll still have this sort of MAGA and Reaganism kind of thing fight again in 2028 with some people that have just totally capitulated to Trump in the meantime. Yeah. It's weird how they think they can just not, like, no one can look on YouTube and see the clip that they said yesterday that said something totally different. So I think we'll still have that fight in the Republican Party. And I think the Democratic Party also will probably only, if I had to make a prediction, I think Donald Trump will probably do a bad enough job in this term that we will do the same thing we've done for the last 4 elections, is that we will elect, probably the House or the Senate or both will flip in 2026. That's just historically what happens, is that the president loses in the midterms, their party at least. And then I think people will probably elect a Democrat but they're really just rejecting the Republicans. I think just because the history of the last 10, 12 years has been that. And if that's the case, I don't think that means that Democrats have like figured it out. I think it's just that, again, people are rejecting the other party. So that's the prediction I'm comfortable making, but I really don't know who it'll be. I don't think it will be the people we're talking about right now, though, because it almost never is. I think you see Newsom today coming out against transgender men in sports, or transgender women in women's sports. And that's interesting because you can tell what he's already trying to figure out how to be running for president in 2028 with his record in California and stuff. And he knows he's got to not be. He saw what happened with Kamala Harris being a California Democrat. You've never even bumped up against a conservative in your life. And so you have no idea how to even talk to them. And you can't win by just getting the super liberal people. You have to get the middle. You have to get the working class. I think Democrats have no idea how to do that. But I still think they'll potentially win. It's just that they won't do it because of some specific political talent.
Yeah, it's not going to be a name. It's going to be, like you say, it's the cyclical rejection of the main thing, of the current thing. And, humans, just our human nature, we're so good at going with the flow. And now, 2 years down the road, we've got the election and people are just upset. Things aren't going the way they want. So we're just going to shuffle some people around. And the Democrats will say, wow, this is great. Look. And other people who could have a more objective view of say, well, this was actually expected. If you guys didn't win, then we would, if it was Republicans again for the next 2 years, then that might be something for us to stand up and consider.
What's really strange about it is that I don't think this stuff seems that hard. I realize, like, for me, it's not like I'm not some political genius or some campaign genius. It's just that I looked at 2016, and the lesson everyone learned in 2016 was, oh, we better go super, super kind of democratic socialist progressive, because that's why Bernie Sanders almost beat Hillary Clinton. And I was like, no. I don't think that's the reason. I don't believe that there's ever one reason that causes these things. Yes. But I think the main thing was that people don't like Hillary Clinton. They don't trust her. She changes her accent depending on where she goes. And I think authenticity is what people want, because you look at Bernie Sanders and no one would ever accuse him of being anything other than himself. He's never dressing a different way. Donald Trump is the same way. Donald Trump wore the suit under the McDonald's apron. He's never trying to be a good old boy, and he's authentically himself. I mean, regardless of what you think of him, I don't think anyone could accuse him of not being authentically exactly who he says he is. That doesn't mean he's not lying and stuff all the time. I'm just saying that what people do, I think, are attracted to that. And I don't think anyone's learned that yet.
No.
Because you look at, I think even look at Ron DeSantis. I think Ron DeSantis is not very good at the politician part necessarily. He's good at press conferences. He's good at being a governor, but he's trying, you can see it. It's just people immediately feel like you're trying too hard. And the classic example I always show is, for my whole life, the presidential elections, you'd go through it and people would kind of hate a guy, you'd have whatever it was. And then they'd go on Saturday Night Live after they lose, and it would be wonderful. They were comfortable. They weren't listening to some focus group or campaigners. They were just they got invited on. They were themselves. And everyone was like, I like that guy. And you go, why wouldn't you just do that the whole time?
Yes.
Stop listening to political consultants. It's going to take a leader that decides to do that and can govern well. Yeah. Unfortunately, right now, we have a lot of people that are authentic, but not very good at the job. I think that's kind of where Donald Trump falls, in my opinion. Or they're technocrats, but they're not good at talking to people. And it's interesting that unfortunately, the way campaigns work, it's silly because it's like a job interview, but we're asking them to take a bunch of tests that have nothing to do with the job that we're asking them to do. That's right. It would be nice if a leader came up and said, gets asked a question at debate and goes, you know what, actually, that's not my job. That's not the president's job. That's Congress's job. And I liked that Nikki Haley did a little bit of that in the debates. They ask her about abortion and she goes, look, let's just be honest here. We don't have 60 seats in the Senate. And unless we do have 60 seats in the Senate, you can't pass any of this. Nothing that anyone is saying on stage matters at all unless you can get 60 votes in the Senate. And that's realistic. That's not promising stuff that you can't do. Unfortunately, everyone else just promises stuff they can't do, and then people are disappointed, and they can't figure out why people are upset at them. Yeah. But it's because they're over-promising. But unfortunately, we'll need a really good president that says, that's not my job, and we'll need a Speaker of the House that says, hey, we're not doing this top-down stuff in Congress anymore. We are going back to committees, and stuff's going to bubble up, and we're going to go back to the way Congress used to work. And you need both those at the same time. I think that's going to be really hard to make happen.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I relate what we see in politics too is the game of chess, in that, and I've said it before, and I should probably stop confessing this, but I'm not very good at chess and I don't play it a lot. Hence, I'm not very good at chess. And my brother and some other people I'm related to, they're great at chess. And the one thing that I have observed over the years is, as soon as I start reacting and diverge from my plan, this awesome plan that I came up with, I'm finally going to beat Daryl at chess because I'm going to do this. And then he does something. And then I have to react to what he did instead of sticking to my plan. That's what I'm hearing from you, is there's a whole lot of people getting distracted, getting off their plan and reacting. And that seems to be kind of the death knell, not just for politicians, but for the constituents.
Yeah, I think that, well, there's no law. Yeah. And then the other problem, like relating to chess, although I'm also terrible at chess, I've not played since middle school. I'm sure my 8-year-old daughter could beat me at this point.
Yeah. Right.
But there is no long-term vision whatsoever. It is none. I mean, most people in Congress are looking to the next election, and that is it. And most presidents obviously are only, when you're running for president, you're just trying to get in there. And then you're trying to do as much stuff you can in 100 days. And because before you're a lame duck, and especially this is going to be very interesting with Donald Trump, because it's going to be the first time in any of our lifetimes that we've had, 2 non-consecutive terms. So he's kind of an immediate lame duck, but he hasn't served 2 consecutive terms. It's going to be kind of strange to see what happens and how people react to that and what kind of chances Congress is going to give him. But yeah, we're not doing it as voters, and Congress isn't doing it, and leaders aren't doing it. Most of our problems are really big long-term problems, though. And, the national debt, Social Security, Medicare being, insolvent in the early 2030s. There's all these really big problems that are coming. And I mean, World War III, potentially. We're in a lot of weird global stuff right now. And it seems like no one, especially Donald Trump right now, he has no foresight through this afternoon, I don't think. It's like whatever he feels right now, he wants to do. And I don't think, first of all, he's going to be dead by the time Social Security goes insolvent. So he really doesn't care.
Right.
It would be nice if we had some people that were thinking even 5 years ahead from now, 10 years ahead from now. But we just don't have the people. Like, I think back to the Constitution, and you just go, in just an insane amount of foresight they had to try to build this document to continue to work, even though technology is going to change, even though they don't know. Like, to me, there's just zero of that. I would take, some Congress with 2% of that ability, of that foresight, we'd probably be able to solve a lot of problems, but we just don't have it right now. And so, yeah, it is kind of a game that they're almost like constantly just reacting and not even making their own move. It's just reaction to the other side. The only kind of move people are making right now is, what should we do that breaks a norm or is illegal to prevent the other person from doing something we're scared they're going to do? And that escalation is getting way out of control. I think that now we're at the point where it's like, I think pardon power needs to get taken away from the president. I think Biden and Trump have already abused it so badly that no one else should be able to be trusted with it anymore. And these are things that I think we're going to have really serious conversations about, because talk about judges, and pick any issue where someone has preemptively broken a norm or a law or something that we considered, might not have been illegal, but it was just like no one ever thought to do it before, sort of FDR running for 3 terms.
Yes.
It's like, we didn't have to have that as a law for, 150 years. And now we do, because this guy took it too far. And I think that the back-to-back Biden and Trump have broken so many of those norms that we really are just kind of in this lawless state of government. And we're, until people demand that change, it's not going to change.
No, the politics today seems like if they were driving us to go pick up a pizza at Gino's East downtown Chicago, they would make so many turns on the way there, we would end up in Wisconsin at a Home Depot. Forget about the pizza.
And there's no consistency whatsoever. Right. And it changes day to day with Donald Trump, and therefore it changes day to day with his followers, because again, the Republican Party has no real guiding principles anymore. It's just whatever he says, and then we've got to defend that. We've got to try to work our way backwards from, it's like, here's the statement, now you got to work your way backwards to like explain it and say why it's our, and that's sort of happening in the opposite direction on the Democratic side. I feel like Joe Biden was completely captured by the smallest percentage of the Democratic Party that was too online, and the sort of identity politics stuff and trying to forgive student loans. And he was only focusing on this just narrow sliver of even his voters, which is why there were more independents that voted in this last election than Democrats.
Yeah.
So that's a bad sign. Like that's a really bad sign for Democrats. And so it's kind of funny that it's the opposite problem. It's like this really small percentage of the Democratic Party that's wagging that dog.
Yes.
And then on the right, it's Donald Trump is the tail wagging the dog, except he's also the head of the party. So
it's like a pug. It's not much of a tail.
It's very strange how it's worked out.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So Blake, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
You can find me on YouTube at The Homeless Conservative, or you can go to thehomelessconservative.com, and you can find links to, Spotify, Apple, all the places that stuff is. And yeah, so that's generally where I am at.
Super. So I think we did a kind of a looking ahead, but any last words, final thoughts to kind of kick us into gear as being politically active and no longer agnostic?
Man, it is. People ask me a lot, what do I pay attention to? It seems like it's overload, it's outrage, it's fear and stuff like that. I would say that the best thing citizens can do is just try to get a little bit more civics education about how government should work better for us, and then vote that way. That is not easy because people are so tribal, and it's hard to break out of that cycle. But especially when it's not like, I would vote for a decent Democrat, but they're not popping up either.
Yes, right.
Not because I agree with them, but in certain situations, I go, this person has to go. I've got to fire this person because they didn't do what I asked them to, and so I've got to fire them. And unfortunately, we're in this weird situation where when you fire someone, you have to hire the next person immediately.
Yep.
In the way elections work. So, and the other thing I would say is just do not stress about what's happening at the federal government. I think that some stuff will happen, like, pay attention to local stuff too, because that's really the stuff that affects you. Your local school board affects you much more than the president of the United States does on a daily basis. And if you have kids, I guess, at least. And so those are really important things to get involved in too, and have abysmal turnout. Those races get won by 100 votes sometimes. And those are things that actually will affect your daily lives, and you will be happier because you can actually go talk to that person too. That's and demand that they do things. So that's the other thing I would suggest. Yeah, that's great. Well, Blake, thank you for your time. I hate to say goodbye, but no, it's fun. Just runs away on us. It does. Thank you so much for joining me for the 5AM podcast. Thanks a lot. You bet. Well, that wraps up our fantastic and thorough discussion with Blake Fischer. And if you are hungry for more thought-provoking political content that goes beyond our partisan lines and the right, left, red, blue team that you get forced onto, be sure to check out Blake's podcast, The Homeless Conservative. You can find links for his show and more information about his work at beacons.ai, The Homeless Conservative. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we appreciate you being here and joining in on this conversation. If you haven't already, please help us grow 5AM Podcast with a like, share, and a subscribe here or there. The other thing that would be great and would make us feel phenomenal is if you give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. That would be nice. And if you want to amp up your support just a little bit more, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com/5AMPodcast, buy a few cups of coffee. And I would be remiss if I did not thank those who were pitching in for cups of coffee over the weekend and last week. Thank you very much, everyone. Seize your day. Enjoy those sunrises and sunsets. I'm Michael Klassen.